continuing with Descartes' meditations, meditation 2 and 6. This is our point of elaboration today. Descartes' meditation 2 and 6 are pivotal in his exploration of Cartesian thinking and the nature of being. Here is a summary of the key ideas of meditation 2. Meditation 2, which is considered as one of the most seminal works of René Descartes, elucidates the nature of the human mind. In meditation 2, Descartes delves into the nature of the self and the concept of thinking. After doubting everything in meditation 1, he reaches the conclusion cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. This famous statement is the cornerstone of the Cartesian thinking, establishing that the act of doubting or thinking proves one's existence. Further, Descartes argues that while the existence of the external world and the body can be doubted, the existence of the mind or the thinking self is certain. The mind is seen as a thinking thing, res cogitans, capable of doubting, understanding, affirming, denying, willing, refusing, imagining, and perceiving. This meditation solidifies the foundation of Cartesian dualism, which distinguishes between the mind, which is considered as a non-material thinking substance, and the body, a material substance. In meditation 6, however, Descartes revisits the relationship between the mind and body and the existence of the material world. He argues that the mind and body are distinct, but they do interact with each other. Descartes provides arguments for the existence of material things using the notion of clear and distinct perceptions, which he believes are given by God and thus must be true. He acknowledges that sensory perceptions can be deceptive, but the consistent and coherent nature of certain perceptions along with the mind's ability to think and reason leads him to conclude that material things exist. He also discusses the mind-body dualism further, asserting that while the mind can exist independently of the body cannot think and is distinct in nature. Meditation 2 focuses on the certainty of the self as a thinking being. This is one of the most important takeaways of meditation 2. Whereas meditation 6 addresses the existence of the material world and the interaction between the mind and the body. Descartes' meditations are foundational texts in philosophy, particularly in the areas of epistemology and metaphysics, where they explore the nature of knowledge, existence, and the relationship between mind and matter. Now we will be seeing or picking up some stimulating quotations from both Descartes' meditations 2 and meditation 6. To begin with, from meditation 2, one of the most resounding quotation is cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. This is the fundamental realization in meditation 2, where Descartes concludes that the very act of doubting one's existence confirms that there is a thinking entity, the self, that exists. This phrase is not explicitly stated in the meditations, but is a summary of the realization that Descartes reaches. Now, there is another important quotation from meditation 2 is, quote, "But what then am I? A thing that thinks? What is that? A thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and that also imagines and senses," unquote. Here, Descartes outlines the various activities that constitute thinking, emphasizing the essence of the self as a thinking thing, which is called as res cogitans. The other quotation is, quote, I exist, that is certain, but for how long? For as long as I am thinking, for it might possibly be the case that if I were to cease all thinking, I would also cease to exist, unquote. In this quotation, Descartes highlights the dependency of existence on the act of thinking, reinforcing the idea that self-awareness and existence are intertwined. From meditation 6, we will again pick up some quotations and see how they are relevant. Quote 1. There is a great difference between the mind and the body, inasmuch as the body is by nature always divisible and the mind is entirely indivisible, unquote. In this quotation, Descartes elaborates on the mind-body dualism, asserting the distinct and irreducible nature of the mind compared to the physical body, and this is how he disconnects the mind and body as two distinct substances. Mind is a thinking thing, body a material thing. Going ahead, from meditation 6, we are again picking up yet another quote where he says, quote, I am not merely present in my body as a sailor is present in a ship, but I am very closely joined and as it were intermingled with it, so that I and the body form a unit, unquote. Now in this quotation, Descartes reflects the views on the intimate connection between the mind and the body despite their distinct natures. Further, to elucidate the mind-body distinction, we will come up with yet another quotation from meditation 6, which is, quote, it is clear that there is no real distinction between my perception of pain and my thinking that I am in pain. There is, however, a very great difference between this mode of thinking and the other, which consists simply in my understanding that I am a thinking thing, unquote. Descartes distinguishes between sensory perception and intellectual understanding, underlying the complex relationship between the mind, body, and external experiences. Now, the agenda of these quotations encapsulate key aspects of Descartes' philosophy, especially his exploration of the nature of the self, the distinction between mind and body, and the relationship between thought and existence. This very interesting, or one of the most key quotes, which was, but what then am I? A thing that thinks. What is that? A thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and that also imagines and senses, is from René Descartes' Meditation 2 in his seminal work, Meditations on First Philosophy. In Meditation 2, Descartes embarks on a quest to discover what can be known with certainty after subjecting all previous beliefs to doubt. In the process of this radical doubt, he arrives at the conclusion that even if he doubts everything, he cannot doubt the fact that he is doubting, which in turn confirms that he is a thinking being. This leads to the realization of the famous phrase cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Descartes then reflects on what this I is, and he identifies it as a thinking thing, a substance that engages in various mental activities such as doubting, understanding, affirming, denying, willing, refusing, imagining, and sensing. The passage underscores the idea that the essence of the self is not tied to the body or to the external world, which can be doubted, but to the mind, which cannot be doubted, because its existence is affirmed in the very act of thinking. This establishes the foundation for Descartes' dualism, where the mind, res cogitans, and the body, res extensa, are distinct. This context is crucial for understanding the development of Cartesian philosophy, particularly the nature of self-awareness and the distinction between mind and body. Now that we have picked up the quotations from Meditation 2 and Meditation 6, of course, some of the epic quotations, which has been there in our syllabus, we will also try to connect the critical evaluation or the criticism on Descartes' Meditation 2. Descartes' Meditation 2, as much as it is a pivotal part of his philosophical project, where he seeks to establish certain knowledge by methodologically doubting everything that can be doubted, and his famous conclusion, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is the fundamental certainty he discovers. However, this conclusion and the associated ideas have been subject to various criticisms and interpretations, and this shows that philosophy is open-ended. To begin with, let us talk about the strengths of these meditation. 2. First, foundationalism. The first strength of the Cartesian dualism is that the approach in meditation 2 is often praised for establishing a foundation for knowledge that is indubitable. By stripping away all beliefs that could be doubted, Descartes finds a certainty that he believes cannot be challenged. The existence of the self as a thinking entity, this has influenced subsequent philosophy, particularly in epistemology and metaphysics. The second strength, the mind-body distinction. The identification of the self as a thinking thing separates the mind from the body. This dualism has been incredibly influential in Western philosophy, shaping discussions on consciousness, identity, and the mind-body problem. Third, the skeptical method. Descartes' use of methodological skepticism is innovative and powerful. By doubting everything that can possibly be doubted, he arrives at what he believes to be an incontrovertible truth. This method has been admired for its rigor and for laying the groundwork for modern scientific inquiry, which also relies on doubt and questioning to arrive at truth. Now we will discuss the weaknesses and criticisms of the meditation 2. To begin with, the first attack was the circular reasoning, which is also called as the Cartesian circle. A significant criticism of Descartes' method is the so-called Cartesian circle. Critics argue that Descartes assumes the reliability of clear and distinct perceptions to prove the existence of God, and then uses the existence of God to validate clear and distinct perceptions. This circular reasoning undermines his claim to have established a foundation of certain knowledge. The second weakness of Cartesian dualism is, number 2, overemphasis on the self. Some philosophers argue that Descartes' focus on the self as a thinking thing leads to solipsism, the idea that only one's own mind is sure to exist. This critique suggests that Descartes fails to adequately address how one can move from the certainty of the self's existence to the certainty of the external world's existence. 3. The mind-body dualism. As much as the mind-body dualism has been celebrated, it has also been under attack. Descartes' dualism has been critiqued for creating a problematic separation between mind and body. Later philosophers, such as Gilbert Ryle, criticized Descartes for what Ryle called the ghost in the machine fallacy, arguing that the mind cannot be an entirely separate substance from the body. This dualistic view has been challenged by developments in cognitive science and philosophy of mind, which suggests a more integrated view of mind and body. Number 4, assumptions about thought. Descartes assumes that thought is the essence of the self, but this has been questioned. For example, existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre have argued that existence precedes essence and that we should not reduce the self to mere thinking. Other critics have pointed out that Descartes' definition of thought is too broad, encompassing everything from doubting to imagining, which might not be sufficient to define the essence of the self. Fifth, cultural and historical context. Descartes' meditations are deeply rooted in the intellectual context of the 17th century, particularly the rise of scientific thinking and the challenge to scholasticism. Some critics argue that his ideas reflect the limitations of his time, particularly in the way he prioritizes reason and devalues other forms of knowing such as emotion or embodied experience. Descartes' Meditation 2 is thus a groundbreaking work that he had a profound impact on philosophy. However, its ideas are not without problems. The strengths of his arguments, particularly in establishing a foundational basis for knowledge, must be weighed against the criticisms, particularly those related to circular reasoning, the nature of the self, and the mind-body relationship. Despite these critiques, Descartes' meditations continue to be a crucial reference point in discussions of epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of mind. Now that we have addressed the strengths and the weaknesses of the critical evaluation of Descartes' meditation 2, we will now start with the critical evaluation of Descartes' meditation 6. Meditation 6 in René Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy is where Descartes explores the distinction between the mind and the body, asserting the real existence of the material world and further developing his ideas of dualism. This meditation is significant because it attempts to reconcile the existence of the physical world with the certainty of the self's existence as a thinking entity, which was established in earlier meditations. So then what are the takeaways, or what are the key themes? The key themes are, let us revisit. Number 1, mind-body dualism. In this meditation, which is meditation 6, Descartes argues that the mind and body are distinct substances. He believes that the mind is immaterial, thinking substance, while the body is material, extended substance. This dualism is central to Cartesian philosophy and has been influential in subsequent discussions about the nature of consciousness and the mind-body relationship. The key theme of number 2 under meditation is the existence of the material world. Descartes argues for the existence of the material world by reasoning that the clear and distinct perceptions that come through the senses must correspond to real objects, as God, who is not a deceiver, would not allow him to be perpetually deceived. The third takeaway of meditation 6 is the interaction between mind and body. Descartes addresses how the mind and body interact, particularly through the pineal gland, which he hypothesizes as the site of this interaction. He acknowledges the difficulty in understanding how two different substances can causally interact, but he maintains that this interaction is evident from human experience. Now let us address the strengths of Descartes' arguments. First, dualism's influence on philosophy. Descartes' mind-body dualism laid the groundwork for much of modern philosophy, particularly in the philosophy of mind. His clear distinction between the thinking mind and the physical body has influenced numerous philosophical debates about consciousness, personal identity, and the nature of reality. Number 2, emphasis on clear and distinct perceptions. Descartes' emphasis on clear and distinct perceptions as the basis for truth has been significant in epistemology. His argument that God would not deceive him, even if he perceives something clearly and distinctly, adds a theological dimension to his epistemology, linking human cognition to divine benevolence. Number 3, acknowledgement of the challenge of interaction. By recognizing the difficulty in explaining how mind and body interact, Descartes shows an awareness of the complexities involved in his dualism, which has prompted further philosophical inquiry into the nature of causation and interaction between three different kinds of substances. Going ahead, the overall weaknesses and criticisms are as follows vis-a-vis the Cartesian philosophy. 1. The problem of interaction. Now, this problem of interaction is considered to be one of the most significant criticisms of Descartes' dualism. This is where the research gap crops up. Critics like Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia questioned how an immaterial mind could cause physical effects in a material body, given that they are entirely different substances. This issue remains a central challenge to Cartesian dualism, and Descartes' own explanation, the pineal gland, is often seen as inadequate or speculative. 2. Questionable proof of the external world. Descartes' argument for the existence of the material world relies on the assumption that God would not deceive him. Critics argue that this reasoning is not as robust as Descartes' claim, as it relies heavily on the theological premise that God is not a deceiver, which not all philosophers accept. Additionally, the argument does not conclusively prove the existence of the external world, but merely suggests that it is probable. 3. Over-reliance on theological assumptions. Descartes' reliance on the existence and nature of God as a cornerstone of his philosophy has been criticized as limiting his arguments to those who share his theistic beliefs. This theological underpinning can be seen as a weak point, especially in the context of a more secular or diverse philosophical discourse. Point number 4, reductionist view of the body. Some critics argue that Descartes' view of the body as merely an extended substance fails to account for the complexities of biological life and the integrative nature of bodily experience. This reductionism has been challenged by later developments in biology, psychology, and phenomenology, which offer more nuanced understandings of the body and its relation to the mind. We will further shortlist the conclusion of the meditation soon. Thank you so much.